The man who became Rome's third emperor was not born a monster, he was born a prince. Grew up in an army camp surrounded by soldiers who called him Little Bouts. Watched his father die of what he believed was poison, administered by the emperor himself. Watched his mother dragged away in chains. Watched his brothers destroyed one by one. Spent 6 years living in the palace of the man he believed had murdered his entire family, smiling at dinner every night. And what emerged from the other side of that specific education, in survival and powerlessness, was not a grateful and chastened ruler, but something the Roman world had never quite encountered before and would never fully recover from a man with absolute power, a genius-level understanding of theatre and spectacle, and not a single reason left to believe that the rules of civilization applied to him personally. Before we go any further, what Caligula did in that arena was so extreme that even Rome eventually banned it. And if you want the full story without the softening, subscribe and leave a like right now, because this channel does not look away. The Roman arena before Caligula was already, by any reasonable modern measure, one of the most extreme entertainment institutions in the history of human civilization, a venue that regularly presented gladiatorial combat to the death, wild animal hunts in which hundreds of exotic beasts were killed in a single afternoon, and public executions of condemned criminals that were designed not merely to end a life but to end it in a way that was maximally entertaining to the 80,000 Romans watching from the stands. And yet the Romans who attended these events and who had grown up with them as a normal feature of public life would later record, with the specific quality of discomfort that belongs to people describing something that crossed a line they had not previously known existed, that what Caligula introduced to the arena was something qualitatively different from what had come before. Caligula came to power in 37 AD at the age of 24, after the death of the Emperor Tiberius, and his first months in power were, by all ancient accounts, a period of such genuine popular celebration, grain distributed, political prisoners released, exiles recalled. The feared informers of Tiberius's reign publicly dismissed that the Roman people, who had lived under Tiberius's paranoid and increasingly murderous rule for 23 years, greeted the young emperor with an adoration so complete and so public that one ancient source records that in the first 3 months of his reign, over 160,000 animals were sacrificed in thanksgiving, a number almost certainly exaggerated, but capturing the reality that Rome genuinely believed it had been given the emperor it deserved after decades of waiting. Then something changed, and here is the first hook that historians have been arguing about for 2,000 years, because the ancient sources are unanimous that approximately 7 months into his reign, Caligula suffered a severe illness that nearly killed him, and that the man who emerged from that illness was so fundamentally different from the man who had entered it, that ancient writers treated the illness itself as the explanatory event, the moment at which the promising young emperor became something else entirely. Though modern historians debate whether the illness genuinely changed him, whether it revealed a character that had always been there beneath the performance of good government, or whether the power itself, the absolute, unchecked, total power of a Roman emperor with no competing authority anywhere in the known world, was simply doing what absolute power always does to the people who hold it. The arena was where Caligula's specific genius for power and theatre found its most complete expression, not because he was uniquely cruel in a Roman context, because Roman political culture had always understood public spectacle as a tool of governance, but because he understood with unusual clarity that the arena was not merely entertainment, but a language, a system of communication between the emperor and the Roman people, in which the specific content of what was shown communicated specific political messages about who held power, what that power meant, and what happened to those who challenged it. And Caligula proved himself a more fluent speaker of that language than any emperor before him, and arguably any emperor after. The first way Caligula transformed the arena was through the manipulation of the gladiatorial matches themselves, specifically through his intervention in the outcomes, which previous emperors had done occasionally, but which Caligula elevated to a systematic practice that the crowd and the gladiators gradually understood was not random favoritism, but deliberate political theatre. Because when Caligula overruled the crowd's verdict and saved a gladiator who should have died, or condemned one who should have been spared, he was not merely expressing a preference, but demonstrating that in his Rome, the life and death of every person in the arena, including the professionals who had trained for years in the expectation that their skill might save them, was entirely subject to his personal will and no other consideration. Stay with this, because what comes next is the specific detail that the ancient sources treat with the most consistent discomfort, and that tells you more about where Caligula's arena innovations actually crossed the line than any of the individual events themselves. Caligula began matching gladiators in ways that were specifically designed to produce not competitive combat, but one-sided slaughter, pitting heavily armed and trained fighters against opponents who had no realistic chance of survival. Not because the crowd particularly wanted to see this, but because the deliberate removal of competitive uncertainty from the bout, the transformation of a contest into an execution, dressed as entertainment, communicated something about the nature of power in his Rome that no speech or proclamation could have conveyed as efficiently. The animal hunts divinaciones had been a feature of Roman arena entertainment for over a century before Caligula, and the scale of what previous emperors had presented had already been extraordinary by any measure. Julius Caesar had presented 400 lions in a single Venatio. Pompey had imported 18 elephants. Augustus had staged 26 separate animal hunts during his reign, killing 3,500 animals. But Caligula's contribution to this tradition was not merely scale, but a specific category of addition that the previous Venetians had not included, and that the ancient sources record with a particular quality of discomfort, namely the deliberate introduction of human beings into the animal hunts who were not condemned criminals, the traditional Roman justification for arena executions, but individuals whose presence Caligula had personally arranged for reasons that the sources describe as arbitrary, personal, and in several cases explicitly designed to send a message to specific members of the Roman elite watching from the stands. The executions that Caligula staged in the arena, the damnatio ad bestias, the condemnation to the beasts, were not invented by him. They were an established Roman practice that had been used for generations to dispose of criminals, prisoners of war, and religious dissidents in a manner that was simultaneously punitive and entertaining. But what Caligula added to this practice was a theatrical sophistication that transformed it from a disposal mechanism into something closer to a dramatic performance, staging executions as mythological reenactments in which the condemned was dressed as a character from Greek or Roman mythology and killed in a manner that corresponded to that character's mythological fate. Orpheus torn apart by animals, Icarus dropped from a great height, Hercules burned. The classical education of the Roman elite turned back on itself as a framework for public killing. Here is the detail that stops most people cold, and it should, because it is the specific moment at which the Roman arena under Caligula crossed from extreme entertainment into something that even the Romans who had grown up with arena violence could not fully process. Caligula staged mythological execution spectacles with enough production quality costumes, props, theatrical machinery that the ancient sources describe audiences initially uncertain whether what they were watching was a performance or a real execution. The theatrical frame of the mythological reenactment, creating a deliberate ambiguity that Caligula appears to have cultivated as a feature rather than a flaw, because an audience that cannot immediately determine whether someone is acting or dying is an audience in a specific state of psychological suspension that concentrates attention and communicates power in a way that straightforward an execution never could. The Naumachia, the staged naval battles, were among the most expensive and logistically complex spectacles in the Roman entertainment tradition, requiring the flooding of a specially constructed basin, or occasionally the diversion of a river, the construction or procurement of actual warships, and the staging of genuine naval combat between groups of condemned men or prisoners of war who fought until one side was completely destroyed. And Caligula staged at least one such event, recorded in the sources with enough detail to confirm the basic fact, while leaving the specific scale uncertain, that featured an innovation the previous Naumachia had not included. He reportedly had the exit sealed after the spectacle began, a detail so specific and so consistent across multiple sources that historians treat it as credible, and whose implication that the audience itself had temporarily become as trapped as the combatants in the water below them represents perhaps the most direct statement Caligula ever made about the relationship between emperor, spectacle, and the Roman people. Now here is where the story becomes genuinely complicated, and stay with this because the complication is more interesting than the simple version, because the ancient sources that record Caligula's arena excesses are almost entirely written by members of the senatorial class, the aristocratic elite of Rome, who had both the most to lose from an emperor who used the arena to communicate his contempt for traditional hierarchies, and the most motivation to record that emperor's behaviour in the most extreme and unflattering terms possible. Which means that historians working with the Caligula sources face a specific methodological problem. The most shocking details are precisely the ones most likely to be exaggerated, embellished, or invented by writers who understood that posterity would judge Caligula by their accounts and who had personal and political reasons to make those accounts as damning as possible. What the archaeological and numismatic record, the coins, the inscriptions, the physical evidence that survives independent of the literary sources confirms about Caligula is considerably more limited than what the literary sources claim, but what it does confirm includes the fact of his massive building programs, his genuine engagement with the public spectacles, his extension of the gladiatorial games beyond their traditional seasons, and the specific financial strain that his arena spending placed on the imperial treasury, which by the end of his reign had apparently been nearly depleted by the combination of his building projects and his spectacle costs a financial reality that is itself evidence of the genuine scale of what he was staging. Because whatever the specific content of the events, the money spent on them was real, and it was extraordinary. The senatorial class's specific discomfort with Caligula's arena practices, the looking away that the ancient sources describe, was not, the evidence suggests, primarily a moral response to the cruelty of what was being shown, because Roman senators had spent their entire lives watching men die in the arena without obvious moral crisis, but was instead a political response to the specific messages those spectacles were sending. Because when Caligula forced senators to sit in the sun without shade while he watched from a shaded box, when he had prominent Romans dragged into the arena to fight, when he staged executions that were transparently designed to humiliate specific members of the elite rather than punish genuine criminals, he was using the arena not merely as entertainment, but as a political instrument directed specifically against the class that had the most power to constrain him. And the looking away was not squeamishness, but the specific physical expression of political terror. There is a detail in Suetonius, one of the primary ancient sources for Caligula's reign, that illustrates the specific quality of his arena innovations more precisely than almost anything else in the record. During a period when the supply of condemned criminals scheduled for arena execution had temporarily run low, Caligula reportedly ordered a section of the crowd, specifically a section of the stands rather than the arena floor, to be thrown to the animals instead. A detail that Suetonius records with the specific, matter-of-fact brevity of a man describing something he wants his reader to process without the buffer of rhetorical elaboration, and which most modern historians treat as either an accurate account of a genuine event or as a rhetorical extreme designed to capture a truth about Caligula's reign the more moderate account would fail to convey, and the fact that ancient readers apparently found both interpretations equally plausible tells you everything about what kind of emperor they understood Caligula to have been. Caligula's relationship with the gladiators themselves, the professional fighters who trained for years in the Ludi and who represented one of the most skilled and recognizable groups of performers in the Roman entertainment world, was one of the more revealing aspects of his arena behavior, because he appears to have had a genuine and personal fascination with gladiatorial combat that went beyond the normal imperial interest in the games to the point where ancient sources describe him practicing gladiatorial techniques himself, fighting mock bouts with professional fighters who were clearly instructed to lose, and in at least one account killing a fighter who gave too much resistance in what was supposed to be a controlled training session. A detail that, whether historically accurate or not, captures the specific dynamic of an emperor whose relationship with the arena had become something more personal and more disturbing than the traditional Roman ruler's role as spectacle provider. The specific animals that Caligula introduced into the arena Venationes, beyond the lions and bears and leopards that were standard features of Roman animal hunts, included creatures that the Roman crowd had never seen before, and that represented, in the political language of the arena, Rome's dominion over the furthest reaches of the known world. Hippopotamuses from the Nile, rhinoceroses from sub-Saharan Africa, exotic serpents from India, creatures that arrived in Rome after journeys of months or years in specially constructed transport cages, and that represented an investment in procurement and transportation costs so extreme that their appearance in the arena was itself a demonstration of imperial power, regardless of what happened to them once they arrived. Because only an emperor, with access to the full resources of the largest empire in the world, could produce these animals for an afternoon's entertainment. The financial recklessness of Caligula's arena spending was not merely the product of personal extravagance or poor fiscal management, but was itself a deliberate political choice. Because the Roman tradition of bread and circuses, the expectation that the emperor would provide food and entertainment to the Roman people, meant that the scale of the spectacles an emperor staged was a direct communication of his power and generosity, and Caligula appears to have understood that spending the treasury on arena spectacles that were beyond anything Rome had previously seen was a form of political investment, buying the loyalty and adoration of the Roman crowd with a currency that previous emperors had been too cautious or too conservative to spend at this scale. By the time Caligula had been emperor for 3 years, the treasury was apparently nearly empty, and the methods he used to refill it: confiscation of aristocratic estates, revival of the treason trials that Tiberius had used to destroy his enemies, the auctioning of gladiators and arena animals at prices that the senatorial class was required to attend and bid, and under circumstances that made clear the bidding was not entirely voluntary, created a specific feedback loop in which the arena, which had been the instrument of his popularity with the crowd, became simultaneously the instrument of his war against the elite, because the money to fund the spectacles increasingly came directly from the pockets of the senators who were forced to watch them. The Praetorian Guard's assassination of Caligula on the 24th of January, 41 AD, in a corridor of the Palatine Hill, stabbed multiple times by guardsmen acting in coordination with a conspiracy that included senators and members of his own household, was carried out not during an arena event, but the ancient sources note with deliberate irony that it happened while he was preparing to attend a theatrical performance. The emperor, who had turned all of Rome into a theatre, dying in the wings before the show could begin, and what followed immediately after his death, the Senate's serious and sustained debate about whether to restore the Roman Republic rather than simply find a new emperor, tells you more about what Caligula's reign had done to the relationship between emperor and governed than any individual arena spectacle could. The Roman historian Cassius Dio, writing about Caligula's arena innovations approximately 2 centuries after they occurred, describes the reaction of the senatorial class with a phrase that has stayed in the historical record precisely because it captures something true about the experience of watching power perform itself without constraint. He writes that the senators present at the most extreme of Caligula's arena spectacles sat with the expressions of men who were simultaneously required to applaud and forbidden to look away, the specific combination of compelled approval and internal horror that absolute power produces in the people who are close enough to it to understand exactly what they are seeing. And it is this image, the faces of men who know they cannot look away and cannot show what they are thinking, that tells you more about what Caligula's arena actually was than any description of the specific events it contained. What Caligula understood about the arena that his successors spent generations trying to forget, because Claudius, who followed him, immediately began walking back the most extreme of his innovations, and Augustus's model of controlled, spectacular generosity was held up for the rest of the imperial period as the standard against which all arena programming should be measured, was that the spectacle was not separate from the politics, but was the politics, that the arena was not a place where power was displayed after it had been exercised elsewhere, but was itself a primary site of political communication, in which the relationship between emperor, elite, and people was negotiated in real time through the specific content of what was shown, and that an emperor willing to use that communication without the constraints of tradition or precedent could say things in the arena that could not be said anywhere else in the Roman world. The legacy of Caligula's arena is not the specific spectacles themselves, most of which are probably exaggerated in the sources, and some of which may be entirely invented, but the political logic they embodied, which is the logic of a ruler who has understood that spectacle and power are not merely connected but identical, that to control what people watch is to control what people believe is possible, and that an audience which has been shown that the emperor can do anything, can save or condemn any life, can violate any convention, can turn any expectation upside down, is an audience that has been taught the most important political lesson any absolute ruler can teach, that the only limit on power is the imagination of the person who holds it, and that in Caligula's Rome, that imagination had no limits that the arena could not cross. Caligula was 28 years old when he was assassinated. He had been emperor for 3 years, 10 months, and 8 days, and in that specific span of time, he had taken the Roman arena, which was already the most extreme entertainment institution in the history of the ancient world, and pushed it past a line that the Romans themselves could feel, even if they could not always articulate it. A line between spectacle that serves power and spectacle that has become indistinguishable from power itself, and the fact that he was killed not in battle, not by a rival emperor, not by a foreign enemy, but by the men whose job was to protect him in a corridor on his way to the theatre, is the most Roman ending imaginable for an emperor who had made all of Rome his arena and every Roman his audience, because in the end the only spectacle he could not control was the one in which he was the final act. And if that ending the most powerful man in the world, stabbed in a corridor by his own bodyguards, while the Senate debated whether civilization itself should continue, if that is the kind of history that makes you stop and think about what power actually is and what it does to the people who hold it without limit, then you already know what this channel's for, and you already know there are more stories like this one waiting emperors, more extreme than Caligula, arenas more disturbing than Rome's, moments in history where the line between entertainment and atrocity dissolves so completely that the people watching could not tell which side they were on, and those are the stories we tell here in full, without softening and without looking away.